And hello, everyone. My name is Dean Yates. I'm a former journalist with Reuters, the international news service. Tara, great that you can join.
Thank you, Dean. It's really great to be here.
So thank you all for joining this virtual book launch for Tara Lal's memoir, Standing on My Brother's Shoulders, Making Peace with Grief and Suicide. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We'd like to also acknowledge anyone joining who has lived experience of mental health through your own experience, supporting family or friends, or if you've been bereaved or impacted by suicide. If this conversation triggers you, there are support services that you can contact, and those details have just been provided in the Zoom chat box, thanks to Laura. Today is Are You OK Day in Australia and World Suicide Prevention Day. I know Tara wants to say a few words about World Suicide Prevention Day. Over to you, Tara.
Thanks, Dean, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us from all over the world. It's really such an honour to have you all here, and especially today being World Suicide Prevention Day. And it's a day which, I feel so strongly about, and it needs to be acknowledged, and never more so than now. And I really hope that in the next hour we can have a conversation that makes a valuable contribution to this day by talking about some incredibly difficult but very real topics in a healthy, supportive and constructive way that comes also with a message of hope.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. And as Tara said, we want this to be a conversation. So I've got a lot of questions to ask Tara, but let me get the first few questions in, and I'd love it if people want to post questions in the chat room, the chat group, and then I can throw them to Tara. So Tara, let's start off by, if you could describe growing up in your family household in London for us, thanks.
Yeah, so it was, we grew up in the 70s in North London, and I was the youngest of three children. So my brother was 2 years older than me, and then my sister Jo was 4 years older. And my mum was English and blonde and blue-eyed, and she had curly hair, and she was had a statuesque build, and she was quite bold and forthright, and she had a fiery temper. But she was also the backbone of the family, and she really held us together. And my father was really completely opposite. He is Indian, and he came over from India when he was 6 years old. But he's very passive and gentle. And, when my mother would start to shout, he'd go, oh, Tara, I do wish you wouldn't. Oh, Bridget, I do wish you wouldn't swear. But he was also quite eccentric. And, he would say things like, oh, Tara, how do you use this water heating device? And I'd go, Dad, it's a kettle. And I don't know how old I was, at which point I realised that my dad was not well and that he was depressed. But I found a diary entry that I'd written probably when I was about 8, and it said, Dad's depressed. I hate it when Dad's depressed because I always think that it's my fault. And I think that really played out. I grew up thinking that everything was my fault. And the way that I could tell when Dad was not well was that, he absolutely loved to read. That was his passion. But when he was depressed, he wouldn't have a book on his knee and he wouldn't be able to read. And the illness really took it from him. And I remember climbing onto his lap and trying to get him to give me a hug. And it just felt like he was enclosed in this tomb, and I tried so hard to reach him and I wasn't able to. Thank you. I used to try and lift his arm up and try and get him to give me a hug, and he just wasn't able to do that. And then when I was 8, my mum became ill with cancer, and I really saw during that time how both my mother's and my father's illnesses were really equally disabling for them, and had such an impact on both of their lives, on their relationships, on the amount of pain that they were in, and in so many ways, and it really impacted all of us, I think.
Yeah. When your mum tragically died of cancer, you were 13 and Adam was 15. Can you talk a bit about the bond that grew between Adam and you?
Yeah, I mean, Dad was admitted to a psychiatric hospital after Mum died, and so he was really quite absent, and My sister was 17 at the time, and she had a partner, so she was often away. And so Adam and I really turned to each other, and he really protected me, and he made me feel safe at a time when everyone else in the world really did feel that safe. And he certainly created my pain for me. And he was the only one that I felt really understood me, and we didn't speak about our grief, but we had this unspoken understanding, and it really connected us, and we built a really special and unique bond.
In his late teens, Adam battled depression and anxiety. Did he keep his illness to himself?
Very much so. You know, no one really saw it and no one really knew. And, you know, towards the end, he started to give little hints to a few people that you know, he wasn't quite his usual self, but no one really knew the depths of the despair that he felt. And it was only really in his writing that I found after he died that he really expressed how much pain and distress he was in. And I think I realised what a huge dichotomy there was between the face that he showed to the world and what was actually going on inside him. And I really see now and believe that that mismatch between the two really feeds so much mental illness and exacerbates it. And I guess for me, my book has really allowed me to be seen for all my imperfections and all my broken parts. And that was actually incredibly healing, and it freed me from the chains that I really felt that I was constrained by. And it allowed me to be true to myself, and ultimately I get to live my own truth.
In the years after Adam tragically took his own life how did you cope, Tara?
You know, I just ran, and I never stopped. And I really wanted to, I tried so desperately, I wanted to leave everything behind. And so I traveled and I moved to Australia 7 years after Adam had died. And, you know, because I was traveling, no one really knew me. And so I never really spoke about it. And I never really had a voice, but I think I also felt kind of very silenced as well, unintentionally, by other people and the fear that they had, perhaps that I would do what Adam had done. And I really felt that silencing was so damaging. And I guess I really dissociated Adam and my brother from suicide. To me, they were completely separate things. And I tried very hard to kind of block out any talk of suicide. And really, that was probably about 15 years of my life I turned away from it.
When you say you travelled, I mean, I've read your memoir, and it's amazing the sort of things that you did in the parts of the world you went to. Can you just tell us one of those, talk about one of those experiences, for example?
Well, I went to Zimbabwe, and I had done a selection weekend to take part in that before Adam had died. And then it was really, I was actually there over the first anniversary of his death. And I think just being away, being in Africa, building schools with my bare hands, being, you know, seeing these people all around me at 18 years old who had absolutely nothing but were smiling and seemed so happy. And it just really gave me that sense of hope that I could be happy again, and that I didn't have to be completely defined by my experiences at that point. And I think that was such an important thing for me to have at that moment, especially over the first anniversary of his death, to realize that at least there was hope and I could be happy again. And I really appreciate that simplicity and the simple things in life.
Actually, just an interesting question here from Karen, who asks if your anonymity through travel was a safety mechanism for you. Do you think that was the case?
I think it probably not certainly not intentionally, but I think in some ways, and you know, it was a difficult thing because it came from all directions. I do remember being at university, because I went to university soon after in Scotland, and sort of feeling like I wanted to speak. And I remember sort of trying to bring it up at some point, and a friend sort of looking at me and going, no, like don't say it, don't bring it up. And so I very much felt like I wasn't allowed to. And then it became comfortable. It became very comfortable to not have to answer those questions.
Tara, what do you think you were ultimately running from?
Myself and everything that was going on inside me. And it was such a violent storm, really, of such conflicting emotions. You know, I had this really intense fear fear that it would happen to me, or that I would become like my father. And I think that fear really dictated my behavior and came with me everywhere for so long. You know, and I had this sense of betrayal that my brother had said that he would always be here for me, and he wasn't. And I think that really, you know, affected my sense of trust in other people and trust in the world. And I had a huge sense of rejection, and that very much stayed with me. And I couldn't understand why I seemed to be so hypersensitive to rejection. And I remember a friend saying to me many years later that she had felt that Adam's death was the ultimate rejection of her love. And at that point, I just went, yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like my love wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough to keep him alive. And, you know, and I had this huge sense of anger as well. And I think, you know, the anger perhaps was one of the hardest things for me to really come to terms with. And I really suppressed it and repressed it. And that was hurting me. And I didn't realize that. And I used to kind of siphon off this anger to other people, and just really push it down. And it was so difficult to process that and allow myself to be angry and to even feel what anger was, and especially towards Adam. You know, and I think I very much also had this horrible sense of shame, shame that I was a bad person. I was a bad person because I hadn't been able to save my brother or my mother. And that came with me, and that sense of I was only, you know, my self-worth really. So I think I was running from all of those really intense emotions, you know, as well as obviously, you know, intense grief.
Was there a point in time where you just thought, I've got to stop running, I have to face this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, when I was about 32, and there was a whole load of things that all seemed to happen at the same time. So I went to a call as a firefighter that was a suicide. And I had a really physical, visceral reaction to that, and where I felt I was going to vomit. And at the same time, I had a colleague who attempted suicide and wrote this letter that just reached straight into my heart and just pull it apart really. And I also had the breakdown of a very short but quite intense relationship. And when that relationship ended, it was like it tapped into this huge sense of grief and loss, which didn't make sense for how long that relationship had been. And you know, at some point I remember very clearly waking up in the middle of the night going, it's the same pain. It's the same old pain. And it was like this realization that I was grieving for my brother through the loss of that relationship. So I think all of those things all sort of came together. And my sister, bless her, turned to me and said, Tara, you've got to sort it out. I think that was when I went, you know what, I need to get some help and I need to change something.
Tara, one of the things that I just found so amazing about your book was how you were able to face those challenges, but one of the things that you wrote about was having to do the work in confronting those challenges. And can you just talk about a little bit about the things that you did that helped you confront those challenges, and what you mean by having to do the work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was many things that I did, but certainly the most important ones were seeking help from a therapist and finding the right person. And, you know, over 17 years, I've had 3 different therapists, and they've all been fantastic, but at different times for different reasons, and just slowly peeling back those layers that I'd really created around myself to try and keep myself safe. But also certainly writing my life story down. And, you know, I didn't start writing with that intention, but it just kind of happened. And I think a lot of the book was written not with the intention of anybody ever reading it. But when you write, and writing my life story down really gave me a sense of self-compassion that I couldn't have had, and self-understanding if I hadn't have actually done that, of kind of looking at all the things that had happened in my life and going, no wonder, you know, you find it difficult to hold healthy relationships. No wonder you don't believe in yourself and have any self-confidence, all those sorts of things. It made sense. And I think, you know, writing at the same time as seeing a therapist was really transformative for me. But I certainly did all those many other things in terms of investing in the quality and of my relationships with all sorts of people, with friends around me, you know, finding my passions and finding that how that connected me to life really. And that was a source of joy, which I hadn't really been able to experience joy before that, I think. So that was important. Finding a sense of belonging in being in Australia and joining the fire brigade and being involved in surf lifesaving and community and all those sort of things that made me feel like I belonged.